Said it once, and I've said it again. I hate Yellowstone. But the Klamath Blue Mountain Lineament, or KBML, was hated by the Yellowstone hotspot long before I was ever a thing. Especially given the fact that when the Yellowstone hotspot made its appearance on the North American continent, it started in Oregon and Nevada. I guess technically it's second start, depending on who you ask. Way back on the Olympic Wallowa Lineament, or OWL, we talked a little bit about how Yellowstone might be fairly related to Silencia, the Olympics, or the Crescent basalts. Given Silencia's age of about 50-ish million years and impact on the North American continent, that means that the hotspot is pretty darn old. We know two dates at this point in time: Silencia's addition to North America 50-ish million years ago, and the start of the Columbia River flood basalt 17-ish million years ago. There's a pretty big gap there. So how did we get rid of this stalking ex-girlfriend of a hotspot for 30-ish million years? Art class time! In the event that Yellowstone is in fact responsible for Silencia or the Olympics, it got its start out in the Pacific Ocean underneath the Pacific Plate. Given the size of eruptions that it would take to create something like the Olympics or Silencia, we need a big power source, and Yellowstone fits the bill. But do remember from our previous conversations that Yellowstone isn't stable, it's moving. Well, it's not moving, the crust above it is moving. So given that the Pacific Plate is moving in the direction, if you will, of the North American Plate, the plume of Yellowstone is kind of getting dragged towards it and leaving a sort of fishtail behind it. This will be important later. Notice that the hotspot is getting really close to that zone where those two plates are meeting. And you would think a continental crust already that's been punched to oblivion by exotic terrains would be a little bit easier to punch through. But here's the problem. Yellowstone now has to punch through two whole continents to get its material to the surface. No matter how powerful it might be, to punch through one water-soaked plate to find another plate ain't exactly easy. But alas, it keeps moving. It's like the world's worst lava lamp. That's actually a really good visual. Eventually, Yellowstone finds a way. And finally, 30 million years of plugged up material is able to come to the surface roughly near Oregon and Nevada. The first large-scale caldera eruption, or what you think of when you think of Yellowstone, occurred roughly near McDermott. And it's this entire body here, it's pretty darn large. But there is that second part of the Columbia River flood basalt being associated with Yellowstone. Yellowstone is curious in the sense that it is able to produce both ends of the spectrum in terms of lava. It can have rhyolite, which is really gas-rich. It holds on to it and causes those big eruptions. Just the same as it can produce basaltic eruptions, which, like what we think of when we think of Hawaii. And they don't call it the Columbia River flood basalt without reason. For you fancy people out there, the geologic term is called bimodal volcanism. But again, we're still missing the how Yellowstone did its thing to equal the Columbia River flood basalts. And ultimately, the mechanism that buried KBML. Think of it like this. For context here, there's a balloon buried underneath the sand, attached to a plunger. Oh, what a nice eastern Oregon and northern Nevada. Nice and flat, ain't much going on. So what happens with the extra injection of material? Well, the ground starts to rise. Very subtly, but it's noticeable. Kind of like a heartbeat in a way. However, what happens when you put a lot of material coming into that area? Syringe balloon air is not a good taste. But notice something quite significant has happened here. We've got the caldera. Sand is obviously not the best stand-in. Flour would have been much better. But we can tell that as the ground started to rise, it would have started to kind of crack open, if you will. And in doing so, weakened the crust. And when you start applying a lot of molten material to an area that's got weak rock, oh yeah! With Yellowstone getting its track right here, the Steens Dikes, the Monument Dikes, and biggest of all, the Chief Joseph Dike Swarm, were these cracks where the ground had been pushed up, that molten material had applied, and boom. And guess what's in the way? KBML. So now we've got to talk about it. The Columbia River flood basalts of Oregon.